and one of his peers asked him, he says, well, did you see anything? He says, yes, I saw an upside-down world. Those people who are humbled down here were exalted up there, and those who exalted themselves down here were very humbled up there. So the teacher turned to him and said back, you've not seen an upside-down world, you've seen a corrected world. But that clearly is talking about a near-death experience, what we would call today a near-death experience. Yes. And there are many stories like that. I mean, it's a classic near-death experience, as it's been studied the past 30 years, identifies 5, maybe 6 different components. Out-of-body experience, a tunnel, a light, they see this light, a life review where they're all of a sudden someone's standing in some sort of either a place or where they're being asked about their life, and they're being shown actual things that they did in their lives, sometimes not such nice things. You know, one of the people who had a near-death life review in their near-death experience said how all of a sudden they had an image of when years ago they were stopped at a red light and the light turned green, and the little old lady in front of them didn't start off right away. And this person was honking the horn, honking the horn, honking the horn. And that when this person had this near-death experience and this life review, that image came up, and she was so embarrassed that she had that the embarrassment and the pain of realizing that she was honking this old lady was sort of like the purging, almost like the punishment for what she had experienced. And then you have some near-death experiences where one woman sort of had a near-death experience, and all of a sudden she remembered being in a department store, and there was a 3-year-old girl or so that was lost, and she went, and no one was helping her, and she went over to the girl, and she held her hand, she says, we're going to bring you to the desk, we're going to find your mommy, and stuff like that. And when the mother came, a few minutes later, the smile on the girl's face was just tremendous. And she had this memory in her life review. The Talmud, so you have positive and negative. It always comes in a tremendous replay of the experience on the emotional level, and it sort of cleans the bad, hopefully, and makes the good, accentuates the good, and you feel it even greater. And the Talmud also has many stories about life review. It talks about people coming before some sort of, actually it says that in the life review, the soul, your own soul, is that which judges yourself. You judge yourself with, I guess, there could be other elements there too, but the ultimate thing the Talmud says is that the soul listens to all these stories that you did good and bad, and when it's done, there's some sort of decision that's rendered. Was your life good? Was your life not so good? What can you prove? What couldn't you prove? And then the soul is the one that signs, you're right, you judged me properly.
I think ultimately we do judge ourselves. We know when we've done right and wrong.
Ultimately, though, the truth is even more than that, because it's not worth anything if we don't recognize it.
Yes.
What's the point of you saying, that everyone's saying you're guilty, and you say I'm not? But the Talmud tells us that in the next world, when you're naked of all your power and excuses and rationalizations, in the next world, you face up to the reality and you sign off on it.
People, you say, number in the millions that have had these near-death experiences. How is their life transformed having been through that? Does it change in any way, or does it go back to business as usual?
Well, that's very interesting. There's a Dr. Melvin Morse that's actually amongst the people who had studied this, and he's done actual studies and found that that people who have had near-death experiences come back with a greater zest for life. And often they've had very good experiences. They've seen their lost relatives, or they've been in peaceful fields and stuff like this. And you might think, well, they come back. I don't have to come back to, you know, have to deal with all the ugliness and stress and all the problems in this world. No, they come back to this life with a new feeling for life. They're not so anxious to go there. In fact, he did one study that there were with teenagers who had tried to commit suicide. Yes. And some of them had tried to commit suicide and didn't have a near-death experience, and some of them did have a near-death experience, whatever it was. And they found that the incident of trying to commit suicide a second time was almost nil in those who had had the near-death experience, when they were just as normal in those who hadn't. So the near-death experience gave a new meaning in life, a new feeling of, you know, how vibrant and important and precious life is, even to people who were so low that they felt they had no choice but to commit suicide.
Wow. Now, scientists have decided to set up clinical studies all throughout the country. You sent me an article about the studies that they're going to do in hospitals. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that was really, if they could prove it through that, that would really...
Right. It's going to take years probably to conduct the study. It was reported in Reuters back in September in 2003. And basically there's 25, at least, they're trying to get 25 hospitals throughout Britain, I guess, and they're going to one of the things it's going to do, I don't know if I should give it away,
No.
but you'll hear why, because one of the things they're going to do is they're going to take objects, I don't know, maybe a cup or something, and they're going to hide it
Yes.
in a place in an operating room out of people's sight.
Yes.
And if they have 25 hospitals...
In a higher elevation, right?
It could be low, could be underneath something out of the visual line of sight.
Okay.
And then they're going to have 25 hospitals who are going to study this, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 years. If statistics are right, they're going to have thousands of people reporting near-death experiences, maybe even floating above their body. And they're not going to tell the person that there's something hidden there. They're going to say, oh, you floated above your body. Did you see, where'd you go? Did you see anything?
It would be placed in a location that could only be seen if a person had floated towards the ceiling.
Right. The wording they use is out of the line of sight.
Yes,
Normal
okay.
line of sight. So they can't necessarily have known that. So if they
Okay.
have this, so that they just started this study. But one of the interesting things is whatever they find or don't find, 30 years ago it was inconceivable that a hospital could even make such a study.
They're taking it pretty seriously.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling how society, the shift in society has taken place toward favorable of even considering the possibility of this.
Well, that would be really great. I mean, if we could establish this as a fact, you know, that the soul lives on. And I think it would take away a lot of anxiety. I personally believe that people have anxiety about death. Who wouldn't? If you don't know, if, you know, after one dies, if it's all over and you wouldn't remember anything, that's very
Right.
anxiety-producing.
Well, I think, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think, by the way, that this is the famous line that King David said in the famous Psalm 23.
Yes.
Yea, though I walk through the valley overshadowed by death, I will fear no evil, because you are with me.
Yes.
When a person has a near-death experience and they see that there is some sort of spiritual reality on the other side,
Yes.
then they can walk through the valley. They can walk in this world, which is like a valley overshadowed by death, and not fear anything.
Feel it's okay.
Not fear any evil means the anxiety that people have.
Yes.
Carl Jung had said that he never met a patient over 40 years old whose problems were not rooted back in his fear of death.
Yes.
However suppressed or whatever forms they took
Sure.
themselves in.
Sure, how could it not?
But near-death experiences, people have seem to have lost their fear of death, and they turned it and transformed it into something that's an energy for life. One of the things I hope to do in my book is that, since I hope people don't plan on trying to create near-death experiences for themselves,
No.
it only if it comes upon you, through reading the book, things like my book, and seeing that there's evidence, what the evidence is
Yes.
in science. And my book might take it one step further and say, you know what, this is not just happening past 30 years. This has been reported 2,000 to 3,000 years ago in Jewish tradition, I'm sure in other traditions too.
Sure, sure.
These types of things reinforce your belief and your faith, and that itself can be a substitute, I believe, and hope for a person to feeling that life, like a person who's had a near-death experience, and to feel the vitality of life without having the near-death experience.
Yes. Now, with the time that we have, we also have the concept of reincarnation, which I think some of our viewers were a little surprised to hear that Judaism believes in reincarnation. So, what's the story with that?
Didn't we have this conversation in our last life? Was that? Actually, the concept of reincarnation, of Gilgul, is not found explicitly in the written Torah, in the books of the Torah, that's just the 24 books of the prophets. It's not found explicitly in the Talmud or even in the Midrash, but it is found extremely explicitly in the books of Jewish mysticism, which are called Kabbalah.
Kabbalah.
And the primary source of Kabbalah is called the Zohar. It's all over the place there.
The Kabbalah is a part of the oral law and
Right.
is passed on as an esoteric religion through the doctrine, rather, through the generations.
Right. According to our beliefs, there was an oral tradition starting even as far back as Moses on Sinai, and it was not necessarily put down in writing for various different reasons. The Talmud became that form put down in writing, but even that was put down sort of esoterically, so it needed a teacher and a student,
Yes.
generation to generation. And this has been the Jewish way, why we've survived for 3,000 years. We've always had teacher-student relationships.
Yes.
Now, later on, we got texts that we use as jump-off points. The Zohar and the Kabbalah is a jump-off point from traditions rooted much further back than the time they were actually written down.
Right. So the evidence, if you could present it to us, very compelling. I mean, like I said, I read your book, but I want to hear it from you.
Right. Well, in science, one of the most interesting people who study this is Dr. Ian Stevenson. He has an MD, and he's been studying this for 40 years. He wrote a book called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
To me, his most fascinating case is he went back to India. He heard of a story of a little boy who claimed to have lived a past life. And this happens not all the time, but it does happen. And he found a boy who claimed that he had been a boy named Muna in a past life who had been murdered by two cousins. And Dr. Stevenson went and met this now 14-year-old boy whose name was Ravi Shankar. He was 10, 12, 14.
Ravi Shankar, the famous...
Ravi, R-A-V-I, Ravi Shankar.
The famous
No, apparently it's a common name in India.
Okay.
And basically he interviewed him and he asked him, and he got about 40, 50 different details about this person Muna's life.
Okay.
And one of the tales that he found out, for instance, was that Muna had a toy gun. Now back then, this person Muna...
A toy gun.
A toy gun. They never had toys, and it was very rare to have a toy gun.